Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here this Thursday morning. We're going through some turbulent times with the pandemic and now the protesting. So we're glad that you're all available to join us for this morning. Um, I want to first give Mary, our international ambassador of the Global Outreach Program, a chance to say a few words to you all. Mary, you're muted.
I'm unmuted now, thank you. Okay, first of all, a very warm welcome to everyone online and welcome to today's EuropeSV breakfast meeting. I don't know, I'm not sure, there are some very familiar faces here. I don't know if everybody is a regular or if there are some people who are not. I thought maybe just, and particularly for our guest speaker, just a few words about the hub and what the EIT community is. So we're a community of 8 what are called knowledge and innovation communities in Europe, funded by the European Commission. And we cover areas like digital, climate, health, food, raw materials, urban mobility, manufacturing, and energy. And our remit is really to address societal challenges through innovation. And we have a very large number of partners, collectively about 2,000 across all the countries of Europe, both the EU and luckily those outside the EU as well, sadly, like the UK and now as well as Switzerland. And they come from business, big business, small business, academia, governments like cities and regions and states, and also non-governmental organizations. But we've recently launched 3 global hubs, really to act as the interface and as a bridge between innovation in Europe and then innovation in key innovation ecosystems in the world. And Silicon Valley is obviously a key one, and it was the first hub that we launched in March last year. We've launched one now in Tel Aviv in Israel, and we'll soon launch one in Beijing in China. So I chair the working group that has overseen the development of these Crosskick hubs and also their activities. And so I do a lot of work with Puisan and now also with Monica and her EIT digital team, who are based in Silicon Valley and have been really supportive and helpful for setting up our Crosskick. I think I keep saying setting up the Crosskick hub here, because I think most of you are in California, but actually I'm not, I'm in London. And I think I mentioned this last time, but COVID-19 is horrendous, but every cloud has a silver lining. And it means now that we don't have to travel to California to come to your breakfast meetings, but we can have a very late breakfast in London and enjoy them too. So that's a real benefit and it's a great pleasure. So I think that's enough to say and not take any more time. Really looking forward to the conversation with George Tilesh going forwards now. So Puisan, back to you.
All right. Without further ado, let me introduce Dr. George Tilesh. He is a senior global innovation and AI expert who serves as a conduit and trusted advisor between the USA and EU ecosystems, specializing in AI ethics, impact, policy, and governance. His global senior executive and strategy consulting leadership track record spans decades with the EU and US administrations, Microsoft and Fortune 50 tech corporations, international organizations, and global think tanks, pioneering startups, scale-ups, and global social innovation leaders. Dr. Tilesh is a co-author of a newly published book, Between Brains, the essential backstage guide to the AI world we are in, that also frames the path to the AI world we need. All right. George, I have a few questions for you. So in your book, you say that AI as an augmented intelligence can potentially become the most powerful tool for democracies and also the ruin of them. So what do you mean by that? Can you explain that a little?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and thanks for the great turnout we have in these times of pandemic on top of our many crises. Another added level or layer of crisis is Zoom fatigue. So I'm very happy that that everybody could make it. To your question, Puisan, I think one of the baseline messages of our book is that artificial intelligence as such, you know, has been hyped, overhyped, but it's very much a reality, and it's a reality now. And one of the things that is very much missing from the overall conversation, both at the leadership level, but especially at the level of the public and society, is the purpose of AI. And we think that we should be very, very bullish, a lot more bullish than we are right now, on each sectors of society on defining that purpose. And of course, we did not coin the term, but I think that the term itself should be much more popular, augmented intelligence, as opposed to artificial intelligence. What do we mean by that? We believe that AI should serve humanity's the purpose of benefiting humanity, the purpose of elevating humanity. And therefore it should be a tool that is steered by humanistic purposes, and it should be something that is, instead of mechanizing humanity, it's humanizing technology. So this is the expression that we are using quite consistently in the book. But because many of you are serving governments in one shape or another, I think that the fact that needs a lot more scrutiny these days is the impact of the incredible advance of artificial intelligence on our current democracies and democratic institutions. So in the book, we have been putting a lens on that, and I've also done a lot of work working with governments and the World Economic Forum, especially on AI regulation, AI policy, and that shed a light on a few major issues that could take a very positive outcome and a very negative outcome as well. So I think one of the biggest statements that we are making in the book is that, and that also indicates the term, the title that we are using, Between Brains. It means that we are at a crossroads. We have to make giant civilizational level decisions at the current state of AI. We have to ask the hard and deep questions from ourselves regarding the true purpose of AI, and we cannot do the laissez-faire type of approach that is so often used. So on one hand, on the positive side, AI can basically create almost, you know, utopian levels of democracy. It can create the tightest connection between political leaders or governments and citizens. It can drastically augment forecasting abilities of governments. It can drastically augment the productivity of government services and the efficiency of government services. And it can also boost, as we are demonstrating in the book, a few industries that, especially in the European sense, are considered to be part of the public interest domain, like, you know, education and transport and anything, many urban technologies that are being heavily powered and will be much more heavily powered by AI. So on one hand, if we are taking a very definite course in selecting AI as the primary tool of serving citizen well-being in flourishing democracies, we can get to this level of, you know, almost utopian democracies. On the other hand, what we are seeing already on the ground, and that's the, you know, the more frightening part, is that in the last 4 or 5 years, it has been clearly demonstrated that a lot of the states that are not following democratic principles and are actually trying to actively undermine democracies are using AI technologies for questionable purposes, I would say. So just to give you a piece of data, currently there are about 60 states that have published their national AI strategies in the world. Some of them have a very specific focus on the social part of it, some of them not. And that is already a huge question mark in our minds. But about 20 more states, so about 80 or 90, are known to have programs in, autonomous weapon systems programs, which is probably the most lethal application of AI and then the most frightening part of it. And also about the same number of states are backing disinformation programs, also AI-powered disinformation programs against other states or against their own citizens. So I think that the biggest caveat that we have right now, that if you are talking about AI in the present context, the signs that it is being used for nefarious purposes are clear, and for it to emerge as a model, as an alternative model of AI for good, AI to benefit humanity, that will need a lot of work and probably need a lot more time. So we have to build up the necessary defenses as individuals and societies against these nefarious uses of AI, be them military or commercial. Even, that there are some commercial uses that are questionable. So we believe that such a scenario of a positive outcome exists. It will need a lot of hard work. And for the other side, the negative side, we need a lot of vigilance and a lot of hard, speedy choices to douse the fires we have and steer the transformation that will probably be the most exponential that we have ever witnessed by upgrading our institutions, by upgrading our policies to match the speed and the depth of this transformation.
Yeah. So when you look at the, currently we are going with the pandemic, so can you give some specific examples of how AI or ML, so machine learning, has been used to address the current pandemic? And do you have any suggestions as to how it could address future pandemics?
Mm-hmm. So, strangely enough, when we submitted the manuscript for publishing for Between Brains, that was the early days of March. So the only thing that we could do at that point is to write an epilogue that is already flagging some of the use cases that we have seen in AI's specific use for the COVID-19 use case. Of course, the situation became a lot worse since, or a lot more in-depth since. So what we have seen then and what we are seeing now are that even in the early days of the epidemic spreading, AI has proved itself as a transversal technology. I would say its capacity to work across multiple domains and multiple capacities. So raising the productivity, the efficiency, the forecasting ability. So just to give you some specific examples, AI has been used to support the healthcare crisis, or solving the healthcare crisis at each and every stage. So in the very beginning, it was used to source or scout about 100 different multi-source databases for information that were beyond the reach of epidemiologists. So I think that the first use case that we have seen is AI's ability to work with large unstructured data sets and creating inferences that are unknown or just used narrowly for the human eye. The next step that we have witnessed is that the analysis, especially of protein structures of the virus, has been made a priority by commercial companies, especially Google's DeepMind, that opened its capacities and infrastructure for the world to try to analyze the protein structures, which is a necessary prerequisite of developing any kind of cure and vaccine. Testing and diagnosis, especially in China, even in the early days, has been done using a lot of AI and automation technology. So it's speeding up the whole process of getting from A to B. That was also something that we have seen. the rewiring of certain cancer detection AI systems to identify COVID-19 proved to be quite successful in the very beginning. So there is this trend that we are calling acceptation in the book. When one system is designed for something, what with a minor modification, it becomes capable of doing a lot more. Yes, predictions of the virus structure, forecasting the spread, the capacity of dealing with multiple unrelated data sets, that's the real power of AI. So these were visible even in the first few weeks, I would say, from the of the global pandemic. And then I got a request in March to join a big task force that was organized out of NASA, congregating about 70 chief innovation officers and chief technology officers of the biggest companies and governments. So we have been working for a month, day and night, and produced a report that I would highly recommend to you, called The Never Normal. And I can share the link later with you. So that was 1 month of hard work for this global task force, around 14 time zones, I think. And what we were focusing on is the long term and the short term at the same time, the strategic and the tactical, and coming up with technological or innovation solutions that could be used in managing the reopening of the world. So that our problem statement was focusing on the reopening, but also, as the as the title of the report suggests, we believe that this is not going to be a full return to normal, but we are expecting insecurity in the long run, and therefore we have to find the technological solutions that make us cope with that kind of uncertainty and insecurity in the long run. So a section of that report is focusing on AI solutions, and I'm not gonna dive deep into them because hopefully you will read the report itself. But in the report, we have proved the power of AI in upgrading triaging systems, so patient triaging systems in hospitals that are very much 20th century right now. So we believe that by being able to tap into much deeper and more diverse data sets when identifying the needs of each patient, these triaging systems can be great in sparing extremely important resources in hospitals. We have been talking about using chatbots and virtual assistants in augmenting this kind of capacity. We are talking about the prediction capability of basically forecasting and reporting the spread of viruses in micro environments. So basically trying to avoid large nationwide closures again, and trying to isolate new outbreaks in micro locations. So there are, like, I think 5 total major recommendations in the report, and I'm happy to send this all to you. So bottom line, we believe that AI will have a crucial role to play. I think that there's a lot of similarities between the nature of AI as a technology and that of the virus, which means that it learns and mutates, and that can also be very interesting in the future, how to attach these technologies and the virus to track the mutation and the spread with as much certainty as possible.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, AI can, it touches on so many aspects, right? And but you already mentioned about the tracking. So on that note, talk about the issues regarding the potential necessity and efficacy of contact tracing apps, given the ethical issues involving privacy. What do you think are the trade-offs, and are they worth it?
Oh, that's a hairy topic. So yes, this is a partially a technological problem, partially a problem of the current mental state of our societies. So what we need to understand is that we are operating in very low trust societies right now. If you're reading, reports from major research firms, levels of trust in institutions, professions, authorities are at historic lows. And I think that some kind of contact tracing technology will be inevitable going forward, but the biggest barrier to them is not technological. I mean, there are certain technological problems we have to overcome, but that of adoption. In a pandemic situation, every society is as strong as its weakest human link. And I mean, we've been talking to the White House task force while doing the report, and they defined as one of the areas problems they're struggling with how to reach populations that do not trust the government, do not trust any government issued app, or do not trust any company with their data, who have a significant overlap with the people who are most exposed and have the highest level of vulnerability in a pandemic situation. So I think that that's going to be the toughest challenge of it all. And of course, on the positive side, I think that the cooperation of Apple and Google and the protocol that they came up with regarding tracing, that's historic. We have never seen anything like that before, such a tight cooperation. That's one end of the story. And the other side of the story, that, it's Google and Apple. And whoever thinks in society or political leadership that industry does not necessarily should define these kinds of solutions, that they may have a problem in that. I mean, if you're talking about Europe, you also see on the national level different approaches. I would say radically different approaches to privacy first or government interest and efficiency first. Even Europe is pretty divided in that regard. So there's a variety of issues on the adoption front that we have to cover, and on the technology front, of course, I think that the biggest problem is that the amount of solutions that we have, and going through the amount of hundreds and thousands of submissions. So again, on the good side, hackathons dealing with coming up with COVID type solutions have become normal. Like massive hackathons became normal in 2 weeks. That's great. That kind of innovation has been deemed as needed. Europe started prioritizing COVID innovation above everything else, and rechanneling the funding into COVID solutions. But the problem is, how do we select the right ones? How do we test the right ones? How do we scale the right ones? That still needs to be done. And that's always one of the hardest issues of this kind of crowdsourced innovation that we experience. So bottom line, what privacy advocates are saying is that, fine, we can give our data to a data company or to the government for a short term, but if they don't give it back, or if there will be data abuse in that regard. In the last few weeks, I've seen a few promising approaches that are in the development stage or in the research stage that are focusing on inclusive development of these tracing apps. I don't know how successful they will be, and the clock is ticking very much. But that problem is going to stay with us in the long term. So unavoidable, these kinds of technology solutions to prove your status in the pandemic, I think will be inevitable, but the problems are abounding, both on the technology and the human side.
Yeah. Okay. So going into more how is in the tech industry, and so Elon Musk, everyone knows, is founder of SpaceX and Tesla. He once tweeted, competition for AI superiority at a national level will most likely be the cause of World War III, in my opinion. So do you agree with this? And where do you see the US and Europe fit into this?
It's kind of funny that, once we said Julius Caesar said, and now we're saying Elon Musk tweeted. So Elon Musk has always been great at using the media. By and large, I agree that AI is the primary source and instrument of power in the 21st century and beyond. I definitely agree with that. Will it be a source of conflict? Will it be a source of power redistribution? Absolutely. It is already happening. And behind the scenes, it has already done a lot in the last, I would say, 3-4 years, when governments and companies have reprioritized themselves and elevated AI into the top 3 of their priorities. So that's definitely happening. What I mentioned before is that the war kind applications, be it cyber warfare, be it autonomous weapon systems, drones, be it basically the whole arsenal of warfare that is being very much transformed these days from traditional war to a hybrid cyber and autonomous kind of war. Will this be powered by AI? Yes. Can we stop it? Should we stop this? Definitely yes. So there is a race going on in the war in the world that started behind the scenes and especially regarding these sensitive topics of surveillance or autonomous weapon systems remained behind the scenes for obvious reasons. What I think is that this vision that I mentioned in the very beginning of this conversation needs to be set clearly from states. And I see a lot of, not a lot, but a few very good examples in some democratic states who are making clear-cut messages about serving citizen well-being and what do they say no to. The problem, on the other hand, is that especially with bigger powers, they can drag each other very easily into this arms race of like powered by AI. So from many aspects, it mimics the logic of the nuclear arms race that we experienced in the middle of the 20th century. In many other aspects, it becomes as transversal as electricity. So it combines the logics of these two major use cases, I would say. Europe, in my humble view, is trying to come up with that kind of vision that I've been talking about. It's a little bit stuck in that regulatory type of thinking or regulatory type of cycles when you are trying to regulate something and then you're regulating a situation that was valid 2.5 years ago. I think, however, I really admire the realization from the European Commission to come up with that kind of purpose and vision what AI should serve. And I think that in the long run, it will pay off as AI is becoming a much more understood phenomenon in the public. It will definitely raise the allure of Europe if Europe has a clear vision on what it wants to do and what it says no to. I think that the recent white papers that we have seen emerging from the European Commission on AI regulation are a telling tale on that it is going in the direction of being risk-based regulation. So understanding what are the parts of the AI technologies that are, the roof is on fire type technologies. And I think that disinformation and autonomous weapon systems are definitely such. What are the AI domains that have an impact that is more longer term, I would say, but it is already working in the background. And I think that the whole domain of AI, future of work, world of work, actually, I don't even like the future of work terminology. So AI and work, AI and the world of work, the present, that is happening there will be an immense challenge. I would already advocate for mass retraining programs worldwide. That not really happening, to be honest. I think that in the short run, I would vote with yes to, like, will AI take away a lot more jobs than it creates? In the short run, my answer would be definitely yes. I would love to see that kind of societal dialogues about, like, what kind of policy reforms do we need for that. And third, I think it's very important in Europe or on the European side to create that kind of foresight type of policy making that currently doesn't exist. Which is basically not backward looking, but knowing the directions of AI development, having a good grasp of the milestones that AI research is heading towards. I think it's crucial to be wearing that kind of anticipatory lens in policymaking that I currently do not really see from policymakers, to get prepared for exponential jumps in the efficiency of that technology. So bottom line, well, Europe has a formulating vision that has a lot of positive elements from my perspective. The US has, some of the biggest AI companies in the world and great examples of the military use of AI or defense use of AI. The mantra here is not to stifle innovation, whatever that means. So the US put a lot less emphasis on creating the right, even regulatory thinking or vision on these purposes of AI, what it should serve. In the last few months, we have seen more signs of these kinds of ethical implications to emerge in the thinking of the federal administration, but it's still some kind of a far cry.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to, you mentioned already about a lot of happening with AI and also with the pandemic right now. So what do you see are a few major trends in AI startups or in corporate directions on both sides of the Atlantic?
Mm-hmm. So in brief, startups, let me start with the bad news. The industry estimate is about 40 to 60% of those startups who are calling themselves AI startups are not AI. There was a trend that started around 2015, I would say, when money started showering on startups who call themselves AI, and that created that typical Silicon Valley phenomenon of everybody rushing there and redefining themselves as AI. But 40-60% of it is not that much worthy of attention, I would say. AI as a technology created, or the current version of AI technologies, especially machine learning, is so resource intense that startups cannot do that kind of game changing right now. It's merely from the standpoint of having access to these immense resources in data, in computing capacity, in talent, that only the big guys have right now. So that doesn't create that situation that we had, 10, 15 years ago in Silicon Valley, when you just emerged out of the blue with a new startup and changed the world. So that's a very different game. The other thing that I wanted to say about startups is that if you look at the top 10 startups worldwide, and by top 10, I mean the highest valuation and highest investment, a large number of them are Chinese, and also a large number of them are government focused. So especially surveillance type technologies, which created that kind of ironic situation that, when I moved here 10 years ago, every single startup wanted a lot of publicity whenever they could. And the ones that are currently leading the pack are shying away from publicity because of what they are actually doing. So that also creates a very new balance. Corporations, we talked about it. I mean, there is no news on the US side. The top 10 US tech corporations are also the top 10 leaders in AI and the leaders in acquisitions of of AI startups. I think that in line with what I said about startups, the equation also changes that most of the AI startups that I see who are forced to specialize in one niche domain, they are planning from day one to be acquired by one of these giants. So that kind of like we are changing the work type of mentality is changing heavily with the introduction of AI. If you're talking about Europe, obviously, you know, Europe is a few steps behind in that regard. There's not a lot of homegrown commercial AI in Europe at the corporate level. For many years, and still to a certain extent, Europe has been struggling with that, you know, innovation paradox that great research doesn't necessarily convert to commercial success. That's one of the issues. The second issue is fragmentation, and what I keep telling to the European Commission whenever they give me a chance to do so is that AI, the logic of artificial intelligence necessitates focus and necessitates the concentration of resources. And that kind of, these kinds of concentration of structures still needs to happen on the European Commission, not just the augmentation of funds. There have been good news in that regard, but like not fragment the funds into, you know, 1,000 disconnected stories from each other. And of course, the talent side of it is also critically important. There is not that many people who can develop AI in the world, like, you know, a few tens of thousands, maybe closer to 10,000 than to 20. So this kind of talent needs to be captured and recaptured, and that's another major issue for the European Commission, that the best AI talent is going somewhere else, and they need to be lured back. So yeah, these are my major points, if it's helpful.
Thank you. So I wanted to give our participants a chance to also ask you a question. So I've just had one last question for you. What are your next steps now that Between Brains, your book, has just been published?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be very brief with that. The last chapter of the book is a manifesto. So we are not those kinds of authors who ask a lot of problematic questions and are not giving answers or are not trying to, you know, draw a blueprint. So basically the last chapter is a manifesto of how do we see frameworks that are AI ready and AI compatible to work across sectors. We really very much believe that the answer should come from the merging of and realization of each other's interests. Currently, policy and big technology are very much at odds with each other. However, big tech owns the technology, so that you have to overcome this kind of conundrum and create frameworks where sectors can cooperate, and the ethical perspectives of AI are not an afterthought, but actually a primary driver of that. So we want to take this manifesto to world leaders, and we want to create these structures with whoever we can. I also have a second book on mine, which is going to be a much deeply philosophical book across the most hairiest parts of AI, with the objective of taking it to a far broader audience of intellectuals worldwide to understand the principles and the logic of artificial intelligence. And we are preparing for language edition. So now it's available only in English, in print and in ebook. Soon there will be an audiobook version, and we are planning French, Spanish, Arabic, and Hungarian editions very, very soon. Oh, and here's the book just to see.
Yes.
a little bit of Da Vinci here.
So yeah, thank you so much, George, for sharing your insights and your knowledge on this topic. It's a very broad topic. I mean, it touches so many aspects. It's very fascinating. I have so many more questions, but I think I wanted to give our participants also a chance to ask you the questions while you're here. About your book, if it's okay, then we can share a link afterwards with the participants, and then your contact information. So if they want to follow up with you on that. All right, I'm gonna open it up to the floor. So I have Jan and Marcel. Are there any questions in our chat that you can mention, or you know, if anyone has a question, you can, you know, just go ahead and speak. I think you're all muted right now, so you might have to unmute yourself.
I have a question. Thank you very much. That was really super interesting. I have a question. You were talking about the Never Normal report and on epidemic and looking at the strategic long term and the practical short term. And another area where you need that combination as well, and which actually is linked in a way to the epidemic, is climate change. And where actually disastrous though COVID-19 is, it's done what no government has been able to do, which is to make us reduce our CO2 emissions. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on AI as we come out of the COVID-19 crisis, and how it can be used to hopefully guide us to a greener development as we emerge from it.
I believe it can have a crucial role to play in that. So there is this burgeoning domain of AI for good in general that followed, AI for autonomous weapon systems by 3 or 4 years, that as the state of the word indicates. But so the good news is that it has been demonstrated by, I think, McKinsey about a year ago, that there is about an 80% overlap between the UN SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, and AI technologies. So in many domains, it has already been demonstrated, and there has been some social impact investments made in coming up with new systems that are AI powered. From the European lens, I've been in contact with the EIB, so the European Investment Bank, that has become a climate bank almost overnight, I would say, last fall. So now they are, asking a lot of questions about this, because this domain is very new to them. But I think that the capacity to forecast and combine with other technologies like AI and IoT can play a huge role in climate change. So if you are coupling the local information that you're getting from certain sensors that are deployed locally with the capacity of AI to accumulate and see through a lot of diverse unstructured data, that could be super powerful in climate change. I think that the point needs to be made that I see AI as the brain behind all these other technologies that in Silicon Valley, usually they are, it's a list of exponential technologies. I see that AI is the brain behind them all. So I'm thinking about AI and IoT, AI and autonomous vehicles, and so on and so forth. So that may hint at the logic. Another application that has actually been a topic between me and the EIB is understanding how populations speak about climate change or AI in general. So the lingo that is being used by policymakers, scientists, researchers does not correspond with that of the population. We could not expect the population to understand deep learning or neural networks to in depth. What we can expect, though, is from ourselves and leaders of the world should understand the conversations that are already happening on the ground, and the capabilities of AI for natural language processing and sentiment analysis, also regarding social media sourced data sets, could be, I think, a very powerful tool in understanding and creating that necessary connection between policy and citizens, if that's any helpful.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you. And in fact, yes, no policy or no action with climate change is going to happen if you don't have the citizens on board. So that's an absolutely crucial aspect of it.
Absolutely.
Yep. Oh, thank you.
I have a question here in the chat. So George, can you give us an idea of where are the large talent pools in the world? Any cities or regions?
There was a huge study on that last year, and I can dig it up. Basically, it was a comparative study of research capacity. I mean, if you are talking about researchers, there are huge studies about that. And it compared the capabilities of Europe, US, and China. you know, citations, publications, quality of senior researchers, and this kind of thing. So what I see from Europe is that the top-notch and the young talent is probably captured here to a smaller extent in China. Europe still has a lot of senior researchers in AI, but it finds it harder to bridge it to commercial. Silicon Valley, by far and large, I think has the highest concentration of AI talent, especially developers, and probably that's going to stay like that for a pretty long time. China is emerging regarding the quantity of researchers. So they started investing 5-6 years ago immense amounts of creating new AI education programs and PhDs in Chinese universities and sending you know, their researchers to the US for a few years and then taking them back in. We have seen a lot of stories in that regard. I think their issue right now is that they are still catching up at the senior researcher level, that Europe is traditionally better off, and the US is probably the best in that regard. The next frontier that I see, to be honest, and that may sound a little bit romantic, is that AI is becoming a multidisciplinary field of study. It's not technology anymore, it's way beyond technology. So what I would love to see is like other disciplines intermingling with AI. And there are promising signs of that, you know, with neuroscientists especially, that are already being used commercially. But I think that, and I want to dedicate a lot of my work into that kind of cross-pollination across industries and professions and vocations. But I think that that's what needs to happen, because the logic that dictates technology is not necessarily the right logic for AI, in my humble belief. This kind of bug fixing, or, you know, let's design it and let's build it and let's deploy it anyway and see what happens. That's not really not really what the power of AI necessitates.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Hi, George. Giovanni
Hi,
Martinez
Giovanni.
here. Thank you for
Ciao.
the presentation. Just quickly, so following on Elon Musk's tweet and his worries, do you believe that policymakers have a proactive or a reactive mindset towards AI? And following on that, what are the costs of effect on the long run of, you know, on the development of AI because of that?
Definitely reactive for various reasons. I think that the two primary reasons is like the understanding, the necessary technological understanding, and understanding AI proper at the most senior level of policymaking. That's a huge gap. Policy is still struggling with regulating or making policy to areas of technology that came before AI, like, you know, data policy or privacy policy. And so that kind of understanding and talent issues inside policy is a huge problem, I think. The other problem is the cycles, policy-making cycles. I mean, you know, policy 1.0 is playing catch up with AI 5.0. We are talking an exponential technology that could make an immense jump in a matter of weeks or months. And you have policy cycles that have not been changing in the last 100 years or so. So that is probably the biggest constraint. But so I see some parts of the world where some vision is emerging, and I think that kind of proactive vision making is the toughest challenge of us all. But even those who have the vision are constrained by how their administrations have been built, and agile policy making is now a white paper and not practice. Is that helpful, Johnny?
That's very useful. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, one more question there was in the chat, and you already mentioned this, but it was about sharing the link to the Never Normal NASA report. You'll be able to share it, right?
I will be most pleased to do so.
All All right. Anyone else that has a question?
I had a question, George. So you mentioned about humanizing technology and developing AI for good. From
Mhm.
your research and experience, what are some challenges to that idea or concept? And I want to mention one example. A lot of the work in AI happens at the corporates. Like I know, for example, that there's a huge research happening in Stanford, which is funded by Google, for example. And obviously, for most corporates, the number one criteria for success is profitability. And so, given the context of how development happens in technology, what are some challenges and how do you mitigate that?
Well, to be honest, it's mostly challenges at this point. So I think that, so there is the level that is understood by most people, which is basically what are the purpose we are using it. Are we using AI for good or evil? Are we using it for freedom or control? These are the regular challenges when it comes with each kind of technology. So one challenge that I briefly hinted at is the speed of evolution and the autonomousness of the technology, the self-learning, self-augmenting capacity of technology. This is new. This has never been done. And even if we are saying like right now, and most machine learning people will tell you that currently we are not really talking about a lot of self-learning, I think that we have to get ready to that point when that kind of self-learning capacity will be visible and a lot more robust. However, if we are talking about the current generation of AI, we have to say that it's powerful but very, very brittle. Its power comes from the fact that it's deployed widely, but it has lots of bugs and lots of inadequacies. Current AI doesn't get context, for example. That kind of humanization of technology is impossible without being able to teach machines to imitate human thinking to the utmost. When AI was still mostly science fiction in the last few decades, researchers set the goal of artificial general intelligence as the key of to AI development, which means the replication of human capabilities. But as you have so nicely put, if it's corporate driven, then the interpretation of the replication of human cognitive capacities is becoming the replication of the ability of delivering tasks. Falling short of what the original meaning of that was. Now, the last 5-10 years, we'll see a lot of problems with AI being able to replicate the tasks of many people and therefore, risking their jobs, or in a positive scenario, augmenting the capacity of humans to do a job better or to have more spare time to do whatever they wanted. But there is this hairy question of consciousness. And as AI in general was science fiction 40, 50 years ago, now consciousness is considered to be the science fiction of the current wave of AI. So basically how we are implanting consciousness, how we are implanting morality into an AI machine. Because it's self-learning, because the data, the inference it makes around different data sets, the conclusions it gets from different data sets, it can diverge from the original objective of the creator. So we have the double problem of an AI creator constructor giving an objective that the AI will pursue relentlessly. The objective itself may be flawed, the data input may be flawed, the algorithm may be flawed, and then in the end you may still end up with the good old human bias that was the primary motivator of that. So there are lots of challenges. Actually, I think chapter 7 of the book is dealing with these ethical, not just ethical, but challenges in general, and the ethical side of it that is kind of under mediatized still, if that's the question. And I can talk all hours about that if you want me to, just staying in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it's a minute till 10. So I scheduled the meeting for an hour. Maybe just real quick before we end is going around. Does anyone have any events that you want to announce and share with the group? Like any upcoming events? No, there are no events. Cannot be.
Zoom events.
I
actually do.
Oh,
Hi,
I do.
wait, sorry. I was trying to unmute myself. How are you all? Hopefully you're all safe. I'm Federico from Mind the Bridge. Thank you. Met most of you guys already, George included. So thank you so much for your speech. It was super interesting. I'm also passionate about AI, so it's a topic of relevance for myself. I wanted to share an event and activity that we are doing soon in September, and we have a little bit of time. But right now we're framing the structure. As you guys understand, it's a very complicated to understand if we're going to be doing it in person or online or what is going to be the format, but we are working behind the curtains to make this happen. And it's called a Policy Hackathon. Some of you participate already. I think Patrick last year and a few partners from the EIT digital team. Pui, definitely you were there. If not last year, probably last year, yes. So the Policy Hack for us is an opportunity to discuss policies with a diverse audience of entrepreneurs, policymakers, and local governments, as well as investors and startups. And so our objective is really to discuss challenges that are brought up from local organizations to address the topics and find solutions that can be actionable for the year coming. So we're finding solution this year for the 2021. So right now we are at the stage where we're looking for local governments to propose, to work with us and see if we can, if they have relevant solution that we can bring to the table. And so that's where we are at the moment. If you guys have any idea of, have any contact in the space with local governments that they're trying to solve challenges, can be also in AI. I think it's definitely an area, AI for COVID. I think this year we're really focusing a lot in the pandemic world, but also in the restructure of the post-pandemic world, with the different lenses than what we were doing before. So please let me know. I'm available on LinkedIn as Federico Gobbi or fgobbi@mindthebridge.com. Thank you.
All right, Federico, maybe you can also type it in the chat box for your contact.
Yep.
All right, any other events or announcement that you want to make for the group? No? Okay, then I just want to thank everyone again for joining us this morning and also evening, because we have some colleagues from Europe. And especially thank you to George for speaking and sharing your knowledge on to the group. Thank you all.
I very much appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.